Uh, Welcome. My name is Brooke. I'm on staff with Atlantic Coast Conference. I think we all know each other fairly well. Welcome. It's good to be with you. If it's possible, if it's practical, where you are, what you're doing, it helps to be able to see each other. Just makes this a bit more engaging to feel like we're doing it together. If you're eating dinner, if you need to let your hair down, we understand. Um, but if practical. So this evening's webinar, where it came from, our assembly theme was living the chain. Talked about that at our annual gathering for Atlantic Coast Conference in March. And this is kind of an extension of that, understanding that we are living in this kind of constant time of constant change. Um, we're aware of maybe a heightened level of conflict, maybe between generations, between worldviews, that could feel more divisive than ever. And we experience that in our lives in a variety of different places, maybe particularly in our congregations, or at least that's maybe our focus tonight. So in the webinar, we want to at least begin sharing some tools for engaging with one another, with ourselves, understanding where others might be coming from, and hopefully give you some tools to work at creating safety, trustworthiness, and transparency, among other things, within yourself, within your personal relationships, within your congregation. So Jill Heine will be leading us through that this evening. Jill Heine is a member at Bridgeview Mennonite Church. She helped organizations create inclusive, healing-centered spaces to build the community, to engage in challenging situations, and to support growth. After working in business and educational settings for over 25 years, she created On the Journey Consulting, whose vision is to help individuals and organizations build a culture that works for everyone through support and promoting accountability using restorative practices. She believes collaboration is vital in this work and takes steps to join and invite others to co-create spaces where everyone can flourish. Jill has an MA in restorative justice from the Center of Justice and Peace Building, and she facilitates restorative conferencing cases and seminars, and serves as a coach, a trainer, and facilitator. So Jill, thanks for leading us this evening.
Yeah, thank you, Brooke, very much. I'm grateful to be here. Thank you for the opportunity and invitation. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And there we go. So we're going to take some time here to get settled into our time together. We're going to do, as this is a virtual space, and as Brooke said, I do invite you to have your camera on if you can. But as part of our virtual time, we're going to just settle in doing a land acknowledgement and a bit of a check-in, and then a short embodied practice just to form our space and time together. And then I'll introduce the restorative mindset or paradigm, and then I'll introduce a specific restorative practice known as circle. And then we'll actually practice a virtual circle here together tonight. And then we'll end with questions. So as I had said before some of you came in, I invite Brooke to go ahead and put the link in the chat again. As part of our land acknowledgement, I invite you to, if you know the name of the Indigenous persons that were in where you are currently residing, go ahead and just enter that in the chat. If you're not familiar, the link that Brooke is putting there in the chat takes you to a map of the world that can help you locate roughly where you're located, and then gives the indigenous people's names. So I invite you to go ahead and put your name in the chat, and then also the name of the indigenous persons that are where you are coming into us from tonight. And then I will do a land acknowledgement for where I'm currently coming to you from, which is New Holland, Pennsylvania currently. And I recognize it as the Susquehannock people are as the indigenous peoples here for this land. And they are the perennial spiritual stewards of this homeland. And I commit to truth telling of history. And part of this truth telling is acknowledging the history of harm done by my settler relatives. And so just reading some things here about that history is we must recognize the deadly violence committed by Pennsylvania colonists that wiped out the Susquehannock people. Pennsylvania opened the first government-run forced assimilation boarding school for Native Americans, and that was in 1879. It operated for 39 years, and the school closed in 1918. As a result of the inhumane treatment, over 180 Indigenous children lost their lives. A common refrain by the school's founder, who was Captain Richard Henry Pratt, was kill the Indian, save the man. Pennsylvania is also one of the few states that neither has a reservation nor officially recognizes any First Nations within its borders. So while this information is heavy, it is important to name and give a more complete understanding of this land. And I just want to acknowledge Kirkridge Retreat Center and Venus Ricks of Collective 7 Solutions for modeling their own land acknowledgements, and from which I helped form mine by their modeling. So if you have maybe had an opportunity, I invite you just to put it in the chat. If there's anyone that wants to go ahead and do that, we'll take a moment. Lenape, Susquehannock. Okay, thank you. And like I said, that link is helpful to look at after we're finished, Susquehannock. All right, thank you. And you may continue to do that as I move us through here. Another thing I'd like to do, we're in this virtual space. We've already talked a little bit about video, but just also invite you to name any accessibility needs that you might have during this 90 minutes that we're together. And if your accessibility needs are all met, then just put in the chat that your accessibility needs are met. And so what might an accessibility need mean or be or look like? Maybe you'll need to be off camera for, a pet's needs, or if you're finishing dinner, things like that. Again, this practice just helps us to be together in this virtual space in a multi-dimensional way. So I take a moment here and invite you to put in the chat any accessibility needs that you might have, and if they're met, to indicate that. Okay, not seeing anything. All right, so next I'm going to invite us to do a bit of a check-in, and we'll do this through chat also. There'll be, I want to make sure that we get through the material, and then in our virtual circle, we're definitely going to have engagement. But for right now, to do a check-in, I invite you to put your name in the chat and just a word or phrase of how you're coming into this space. We've all had days, hours before we are meeting together. Just invite you to put your name and how you're coming into the space, a word or a phrase. Yeah, thanks, Carmen. Yeah, a bit distracted, juggling childcare, grandchild care. Hmm. Yeah, distraction. Hmm. Curious, ready for rest, tired, stressed. All right. Well, this helps us hold um, hold the complexity of how we come together. And I'm grateful that each person is here tonight. And so then as a last part of our settling into this virtual space, we'll do a short embodied practice. So I invite you to get comfortable, whatever that looks like for you. So I invite you, we see each other's heads in this virtual space, and we know that we ourselves have bodies and that other people have bodies too. So in this practice, I just invite us to recognize that we have a body and take a quiet moment to feel yourself sitting on whatever surface you're sitting on, or maybe you're standing like me, whatever kind of surface you're standing on. Is it hard? Is it soft? Just go ahead and take a moment to feel that, to sense that. And also recognize that we are breathing. Recognize our breathing in and our breathing out. Recognizing our blood flowing. And that our bodies do all these functions without instruction. And I invite us to thank our bodies for doing its work. All right, and welcome us back together in this virtual space. So I'm going to go ahead and move into introducing what is a restorative paradigm or mindset. So a restorative paradigm is a worldview or a mindset that centers relationship. It's rooted in indigenous communities around the globe and has been practiced for millennia. Restorative justice is a compass, not a map, as said by Howard Zehr, who is known as the grandfather of restorative justice here in the West. And I'm guessing many of us are familiar with Howard. He brought to the Western criminal legal system what indigenous communities have practiced for millennia, what has been named as restorative justice. So restorative justice is built on the understanding that by centering relationships, we build connection, and the connection builds trust, and trust enables change. Understanding that trust is foundational to being together well. Acknowledging change moves at the speed of trust. Neuroscience shows that our brains can change and that it is a slow, intentional process. New neural pathways do not replace the old ones, but we can create new neural pathways by changing how we respond to a situation. So restorative practices are tools for establishing new patterns and creating durable, sustained change. A restorative mindset is also healing centered. It's trauma aware. It understands that trauma is part of our individual and collective lives. It invites accountability through community rather than punishing in isolation. A restorative mindset also fosters emotional growth, recognizing that emotions and feelings are part of the human experience. And these restorative practices create a container to hold these feelings and emotions. And these practices create an open stance that helps us receive emotions more readily. Restorative processes or practices or paradigm is also an embodied practice. It comes with an awareness that of our bodies and honors what they tell us and acknowledges the wisdom that the body has to offer. So restorative justice or a paradigm, it's about being present and healing. And with a restorative frame, we are no longer listening to respond, but listening to understand. So as I mentioned, we're going to talk about a specific restorative practice tonight, and that is the restorative circle. And so a circle is a simple, structured process of communication that helps participants connect with themselves and others, and to have a deeper understanding of themselves and others. And the circle space is designed to help us move in the direction of our best selves. Most spaces that we find ourselves in society teach us to assimilate to a specific model that's held as best. And this model is based on an individualistic mindset, an understanding that as individuals, we are responsible for an outcome. Most of these spaces are hierarchical in structure, with an understanding that there are some that are more valuable than others, whether that's explicitly named or not, but there's an understanding that there's some at the top whose ideas or well-being is more important than those that are at the bottom. These spaces often lack transparency and also discourage vulnerability, or they encourage vulnerability from some, but not everyone. Similarly with humility, most of these spaces discourage humility or require it or hold those some accountable to being humble, but excusing others from that requirement or that expectation. And often these spaces also view certainty as evidence of good leadership, where a restorative circle space is a non-hierarchical space that invites us to participate by speaking and listening, and views both of those roles as active and important. It's based on the belief that those who are in the circle are who's needed for that very moment in time, with the understanding that each person brings something important to that context. And the circle invites us to connection and humility. Communication builds connection, and connection lays the foundation for communities to stay together whenever challenging situations come up, which we know they inevitably do. Connection builds trust, which is foundational to our lives. We as humans are built for connection. It's how we're created. Circles can be used for many different purposes, such as building community, celebrating a milestone, engaging a challenging topic, addressing conflict. I like to think of circles, they provide us as a way to integrate the intellect. We spend so much time up here in our heads. So circles provide a way to integrate the intellect with the heart and the body. We live in a fast-paced world. Life is constantly changing. Processing change is emotional work, and sharing stories and feelings is also emotional work. As humans, it's important and needed to allow ourselves to feel our feelings and emotions and not repress or bury or ignore them. Feeling our feelings doesn't mean that we get stuck in them or that we're controlled by them. By allowing ourselves to feel our emotions, it helps us recognize and name them. And doing this in community is healing work. A circle makes space for each participant and invites us to connect with ourselves and those around us. In circle, power dynamics can be named, and a circle fosters a space for people to feel brave enough to bring their full selves. There's an African proverb that goes in this way, saying, a child who has not been embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its worth. And I think this is true for everyone, not just children. Everyone needs to know they belong. It's a human need to feel that we belong. And circles are a tool to help create spaces, to hold many things at the same time. And we know that practicing ways of communication that feel unfamiliar, that ask us to practice something that feels vulnerable and uncertain is challenging. Our communities have done things that feel unfamiliar recently as we've navigated the pandemic. The courage and strength we have shown as communities with these changes are building our capacity for change. And we're building the capacity to evolve and adapt to different situations. All right, so now we're gonna stop me speaking so much, and we're gonna stop recording. I think if I heard you, Carmen, the question was, are prompts always part of the circle? And if so, how are they created or who creates them? Does that sound right? Yeah. Yeah, prompts are definitely part of the circle. And as far as who, I think from my experience and how, I mean, circles can also be very, yes, feel free to pop off as you need to. Circles can be, can emerge and come into being. And so prompts could be very spontaneous. I know for myself, circle still feels, and I've had several years of experiencing circle now, about 3. So I think for most of us, circle still is a very maybe somewhat unfamiliar space. And so to answer the question, yes, whoever is designing or whoever is coming up with the goal of the circle, but also forming prompts, it can be good to get feedback from others. And just something around prompts. And this makes it challenging for me, but the idea of having a prompt that's expansive. And so trying to not have a leaning question in like a positive or a negative way, but to whatever goal of the circle it is, to have a prompt that invites, that is, it's just very inviting for persons to feel like they can share what's rising up for them and not skewed in a certain, whether it be negative or positive way, if that makes sense.
Open questions, you're saying, not yes or no kind of question.
Well, or even like today I was helping someone, I'll be co-facilitating a circle tomorrow at the YWCA in Lancaster. And so building community, and even like the prompt, what is your favorite place to go and why, like in Lancaster or, in your community, in this county that we live. So we changed the word even favorite, because favorite tends to imply positive, or so we changed it to meaningful so that it invites, it's not perceived as a positive per se. And favorite wouldn't need to be, but you know what I'm saying? So it's really like very intentional about the word choice. But to not make it science, it's just, that is some of the restorative piece behind circle, is to be inviting, non-judgmental, non-hierarchical, and to really invite what emerges for persons rather than be prescriptive. Hope that's helpful. I know we're at 8:31, so I want to be mindful of person's time. Does anyone else have any? If not, I can hand it over to Brooke.
Jill, thank you so much for preparing and leading us this evening. Thanks to the rest of you for joining us. I'll be putting together the recording and putting it on our ACC YouTube channel. I'll send that up by email, maybe with a couple of questions just to get your feedback on this evening, both for Jill as a presenter and for me as far as what future content would be helpful from Atlantic Coast Conference. So appreciate being with you tonight. And I think we'll end there. Have a great evening.
See ya. Bye. Thank you all.